All right, so real quick, guys, I don't know if you noticed, I posted an assignment to project. You can work with partners if you like, but if you don't work by yourself, that's fine too. We're moving into weapons of warfare. So with World War One, it's known as the first technological war. And well, I'm going to talk about a few advancements here today, more broad range, and then I like you guys to maybe find a weapon you'd like to present on. So I'm going to go over the assignment with you, but more or less, you're going to act like a weapon developer. So during the time and give a report of why your country should maybe pursue in buying or developing a weapon like this. So it should be fun. I think you guys should find it interesting. And I'm going to have these presentations for Friday. Oh, okay. All right. So it's not too bad, I promise. Anyway, real quick, before we get rolling into the lesson, what kind of warfare are we talking about in World War One? This question, I tell you what, should be an easy one, a layup. Ben?
Trench warfare.
Yeah, trench warfare. Good job. And with trench warfare, mostly defensive or offensive war? What kind of war is this? Awesome.
That's a
Defensive, yeah, good job. So, in other words, the stalemate or gridlock for much of the war. All right, real quick, World War One, 1914. So when the assassination happened, and it will end in 1918. So 4 long years, this war will really rage on in Europe. And the Western Front is going to be a lot what we hear from, right? Yeah, the Eastern Front's still there with Russia, Germany, Austria, but for the most part, you hear a lot of reports from the Western Front because that's where the United States ended. That's where Great Britain obviously was fighting for much of the war, which we have a lot of reports on. Um, anyway, with trench warfare, what's the area between the trenches called again? Aldrina. No man's land. Yeah, good job. All right, so with these weapons here, I'm going to talk about, since the war was much of a stalemate for 4 long years, both sides try to create something that would bridge that gap, try to get through no man's land, right, in order to attack the enemy trench. The goal is to win the war. The only way to do that is get across no man's land. And you got to try to break this gridlock. You got to try to break the stalemate. And a lot of these weapons here, which I'll talk a little bit about, go research more of, is what's going to help win this war. So I'm going to talk about weapons today, and then I'll have a video towards the end of class, and I'll let you guys work on your projects today. I'm going to try to go through a bit of information each day leading up to Friday. So I want to try to do like 15, 20, 25 minutes of lecture, and then you guys work the rest of the period on your project. Okay, don't hold me to that. Just kidding, I'll try to do my best. Try to do my best, make sure you guys have some time. But you guys have to find some time here on your own to work on the project. All right, so I'm going to dive right into the notes. Again, vocab, we don't have any today. Bell ringer, no bell ringer. I just reviewed it. We just got done with the test, the causes of World War One, and the math quiz. So, real quick, those who need to take the Jenna, Sal, Flo, yeah. I'll have you guys take it here. It's not like there'll be anything there on the test, so you guys can take it here. I'm gonna bring up the QR code. You guys just scan it, all right? And then you guys can take it here. All right, there you go. Ms. O'Neill stole my maps. The test open for you? I'm gonna have to put up on the screen then the map for you. Yeah, Ms. O'Neill stole them all. What the heck? She took all my maps. Where? That's not the thing. After put both ankle bands. Like this, and he didn't realize one here. Those are the funniest things. Where were you guys? Where did I see you, Matt? That was during the week. All right, so hey, there's the map. Those of you taking the test there, here's the map. Hey, clear your desk, those taking the test, all you need is your iPad. All right, so real quick, trench warfare, it was brutal, it was not fun, right? It was mostly boring, which we talked about. So a lot of times here with the soldiers in the trenches, PTSD, bodies laying everywhere, right? And just the really unclean, unsanitary conditions. Disease, sickness killed more men than actual combat. So with World War I, this was an awful, terrible war, and the experiences were brutal, right? I know I talked a little bit about Tolkien, right? The author of Lord of the Rings. His experience in World War I really influenced him to write the stories, the Lord of the Rings, which I thought was interesting. But it just goes to show again how this war is changing, how this industrial age that these European countries, the United States, as they're entering that industrial revolution, they're going to apply these forms of technology to warfare. And with World War I and trench warfare, the goal is to try to break that stalemate. So weapons is going to be used pretty heavily during this conflict. All right, so I'm just going to run through a few of them, and then I'm going to present the activity to you. The presentation here I'd like you to create for Friday. Anyway, so the goal is to try to get across no man's land. Well, how do you do it? A lot easier said than done, right? Obviously, there were machine guns, there were snipers, there were forms of Gatling guns that were already established on the battlefield, that were already there, right? It just becomes towards World War I, they become a lot more mature, a lot more innovative, right? So they really fine-tune these weapons to really embrace the war effort itself. So machine guns become a lot more efficient, right? They can fire a lot more, obviously, bullets. When it comes to submarines, right? Submarines were obviously used during kinda, right, before World War I, but they start becoming a little bit more innovative. Germany, during that naval arms race, really put a lot of effort for U-boats, those submarines, and things start to advance. Right, again, Great Britain, which we'll talk about, they need to try to find where these submarines, these U-boats are. So sonar starts to be developed a little bit later, right? It's not right away, but a little bit later. So eventually radar systems will be created. That'll be more towards World War II. They'll fine tune that, but the technology is somewhat there. So again, when you think of World War I, another name for it, we already talked about the Great War, the war to end all wars. Boy, was that wrong. And then the first technological war. That's another name for the conflict. All right, so other weapons introduced. So we'll just start here with poison gas. So with poison gas, chlorine and mustard gas, these are the types that you really hear about the most during World War I. And Germany was one of the first countries here to utilize the weapon, right? And well, this is a way to try to stop any type of movement coming across no man's land. If your enemy can't breathe, well, how are they going to be an effective warrior on the battlefield? They won't. With chlorine gas, how it works is that, well, first it really blinds you, right? It hits every opening on your face. I say your mouth, your nose, your ears, you name it. And they start to swell up, right? In a way where you're not effective. You can't hear, you can't see, well, forget about even being a great soldier. Right? Also with chlorine gas, this will fill in the lining of your lungs. So in other words, your lungs will fill up with water, right? To a point where you'll drown from the inside out. So this was a horrible, awful way to go. And typically when you see World War I, a lot of the combat, a lot of the scenes you do see are men wearing gas masks to try to protect themselves from these awful, awful chemicals that were introduced during conflict. And we talked a little bit about chemistry during the scientific revolution. And boy, oh boy, you can see that advance leading up to the Industrial Revolution, right? So chlorine and mustard gas, this was brutal, awful, and they would flush a lot of trenches out, bunkers out with this type of gas. After World War One, it comes somewhat of an agreement. Obviously, warfare brings the ugly side of everybody out, but with all the countries in the world, we'll talk about the Geneva Convention towards the end of the war here. They agree that we need to ban the use of these weapons, right? This is just a horrible, awful way to suffer and die, right? A way to go. So poison gas, definitely something introduced. Like I mentioned, a lot of pictures you see in World War One, you see with gas masks, and that's for this main reason. All right, machine guns. When it comes to a Gatling gun, that's been around for a little bit, right? Machine guns, yeah, they're around, but they weren't near as efficient, right? Especially when you get to the trenches. So this is where you start to see the development of a submachine gun. So something a little bit smaller, a little bit more maneuverable, right? And as you make your way into the trenches, you can move side to side, right? You can move into the trenches because how are they dug? Straight lines or zigzags? How are they dug? Flat? Yeah, right. There's a lot of breaks in the trenches to prevent anybody from just mowing everybody down with these new weapons. So submachine guns start to get developed, and they're a lot more maneuverable in the trenches. Right, but again, you think about some of the massive machine guns that are used with a tripod, right? That's a way to try to take out a lot of people out there trying to make their way across no man's land. All right, so machine guns start to be developed. Flamethrowers, right? So with the flamethrower, you're probably thinking World War II, where there's one guy with a backpack on, and he's making his way into the trenches or a bunker and trying to really fill it with fire, right? That's not what you see in World War One. Towards the end of the war, maybe, but right during the start of it, during the height of World War One, typically you see many men utilizing a flamethrower. So here's a picture down here I put in. So typically you see a guy here with, like, let's say a wheelbarrow, right? The wheelbarrow will have a tank on it where this flame, this solution was used to spray out this fire. So there'd be a guy pushing this wheelbarrow across no man's land, which again, hard enough so it is. And you'd have a few other men utilizing the hose, making sure the hose is staying off the ground. Because if there's any type of piercing or any type of damage to that hose, well, you're gonna see an explosion. And it's not gonna be good for the people actually using the flamethrower. So yeah, they would try to keep this off the ground as they make their way across no man's land. It seems like a suicide mission because it pretty much is. And then obviously you'd have a guy here on the front, right? The front end, utilizing the end of the flamethrower, right? Where the flame actually shoots out of the weapon. So he would point it into whatever direction they need to flush out the enemy, either in a bunker or a trench. So this is like a 5-6 man process. It's not like just one person with a backpack on, right? In World War II, you'll see more of the 1-man operation of it. I'm sure you've seen many videos like in Saving Private Ryan. They always do this, or any type of video game that you guys play, right? You shoot that tank. Well, there's chances are that thing might explode. So again, it is kind of a suicide mission, just utilizing a weapon like that. All right, artillery field guns. Okay, so when it comes to field guns and artillery batteries that you see in the trenches, we talked about this when I said about the design of the trench. They focuses behind, right, your own trench. And this is constantly lopping over, shooting over your own home trench and landing in a no man's land, but also trying to target the enemy trench, right? Towards the end of the war, you start to see, artillery being applied to the rail system, so trains. So they would kind of use this in a way to bring it as close as possible to the battlefield and shoot these artillery shells from far distances. And you should see some of the artillery cannons that you see. They're massive and huge. And they apply it to the railroad, which is a way to move it a lot easier, more efficient. All right, tanks and armored cars. All right, so with tanks, it's not like what you think in World War II, right? We'll talk about that later down the line as tanks become more developed. Right here on the right-hand picture, you can see this is what your typical tank looked like, okay? And you don't see really a massive cannon hanging off or any type of massive gun. It was just more or less a battering ram. And they would constantly break down. So it wasn't very efficient at first. Towards the end of the war, things start to change. But this tank, you got to imagine, needs a lot of horsepower to move this massive armor, right? This massive shield in a way. And again, that's what they used it for. So you got to get across no man's land. You pile the troops in behind it. You'd have like a line of 20, 30 men, right? Making their way behind the tank, using it as protection, right? So you got to imagine the people inside of that tank. You constantly hear the machine gun fire against the armor. That had to be definite for sure. But yeah, it's really not the greatest. And anyway, it makes its way across no man's land. It just crashes right into the enemy trench. So you can mow right through barbed wire with it. And again, it's used more as a battering ram than anything. So tanks, there you go. Do you guys know how the tank got its name? Brody.
Um, they were, they were told that it was used for 2021.
Yes, good job, right? So England, they tried to disguise the use of tanks on the battlefield and they control the seas, right? So they're bringing these tanks, right, over to Europe, across the English Channel, and they wanted to try to disguise it so that Germany didn't see what kind of weapon this was. So they just had water tanks written on the side of the boxes that are surrounding it. And they piece it together, obviously, but they bring it down into Europe. And they try to disguise it saying, oh, no, they're just water tanks. Yeah, that's it, that's it. So again, you want to make sure you have the leverage here when it comes to warfare. And that was a way for Britain to hide what kind of weapon this was. So that's an interesting story about it. Good job, Cody. Submarines, U-boats, like I mentioned, U-boats, early on in the war were very effective, right? And obviously you'll see them in World War II. Even still to this day, submarines are very effective. Right now, you see more nuclear submarines, right? As they can be powered and utilized underwater for a long, long period of time because the energy source is very good. Back then, they didn't have nuclear, obviously. So, yeah, you had to come up the surface quite a bit. And that's where Britain, right, with dreadnoughts would take a lot of these out. Torpedoes were not very effective, right? Early on. So torpedoes, they were good and all, right, when they worked. And even in World War II, torpedoes oftentimes just misfire. So when you think about a U-boat or a submarine taking out a whole fleet of ships, typically that did not happen. A lot of it was more just based off the recon, just to kind of see what kind of movements were happening across the Atlantic with the United States making their way to Europe, or England making their way across the English Channel. So yeah, submarines and U-boats weren't based off of reconnaissance. But later in the war, we'll talk about it, right? These submarines will be used against many of these British ships, supply ships that America is bringing over to the war in 1917. So it takes some time, but yeah, very efficient. All right, airplanes. Okay, we'll talk about airplanes a lot more in World War II, but World War One, this was the first really development equipment of the war that people think of. You guys ever seen the movie Fly Boys with James Franco? No, I typically show it in class, but we'll see what kind of timeline we have. Right? Maybe at the end of the chapter, we'll watch it. Movie day? I don't know. But anyway, with airplanes, this is the design of it. They can fly about 100 miles per hour, a little bit faster. And with airplanes, they were used to try to obviously eliminate any type of zeppelins, right? So if you guys get a chance, maybe look into zeppelins with your research project. And these zeppelins were pretty much just big, massive, like lead balloons in a way, literally. And they would drop bombs on enemy manufacturing and other trenches. So these airplanes were used mostly in the sky to try to take out these zeppelins, which was a pretty easy target. But even over the trenches, you start to see dogfights or aerial fights. And as the war prolonged, right, a lot of these dogfights really occur a lot more during the conflict. But at first, not so much. Anyway, the Red Baron was one of the most famous, right, when you think of the pilots of the time, and he fought for Germany. So he was kind of this herald figure during World War One that was pretty much just taking out any Allied airplane or any Allied squadron. So these airplanes, a lot of times were just utilized with cannons. That's it. So it wasn't like a metal that was protecting it or armor on the airplane. Again, you'll see that more towards World War II. But this was a really strong fabric. And as you can imagine, as you're getting lit up by machine gun fire, right, this fabric's not very durable and tends to catch on fire, especially when you have a motor, right inside here, an engine for the airplane that gets pretty dang hot. So it wasn't the greatest. A lot of the airplanes too, it's not like they had parachutes really even. So parachutes really weren't a thing. So when these pilots were up in the air, and let's say you ran out of gas, or let's say an enemy is targeting you, they would just give you a pistol. And I guess I'll just leave it at that. When you're going down, you can take one route, just crash land, or unfortunately the other route with using this. Also, they try to time up with machine guns on the front of the airplane. So there was like a means of actually stopping the propeller. So the propeller would move, and then as they're coming to target an enemy, it would cut the engine. So the propeller would actually stop for a brief moment, and you can time it up to use the machine gun to shoot an enemy. Right? So this was an interesting way towards the end of the war. They started to develop this technology where you could actually apply machine gun fire on airplanes. And then later, towards the end, they started to put the machine guns further out on the sides of the wings so that you can fire on enemies. Any type of bombs were actually literally inside of the airplane. So like if you're looking to bomb an enemy trench, right? They would just put a lot of times these smaller makeshift bombs on your lap. So you would just throw it out right out of the opening of the airplane, hope and pray that you destroy your enemies. So you can imagine if you're getting shot at, well, you literally have some bombs literally laying in your lap, and that would explode if it would take on heavy fire. So there you go. There's some of the weapons. Again, broad look at it. I want to talk about the assignment now. So everybody open up Canvas. I published this on Friday, and I put in a discussion post where, just like before, you're going to tell me what weapon you're going to research, who you're working with. You want to work by yourself, that's fine. All right, so modules, here it is. All right, so all I want you to do is research a famous weapon developed in World War I and present it. So in other words, you're going to act like a weapons dealer or weapons developer, and you're going to try to present on one of these weapons during World War One. The goal is to understand it. The goal is making sure it's fun for you guys to be creative. I'd like you to create, let's say, a creation on Canva, Google Slides, however you want to do it, right? But make sure you include pictures and obviously have some of a written element to it where you can explain why you chose this weapon, right? And what's the benefits on the battlefield. So I didn't get to talk about it too much, but a trench gun, it's like a shotgun, right? That you can maybe even research too as you're getting yourself into the trenches. All right, real quick, who'd like to read this for me? We'll just roll through it together. Jason, go ahead. Still loaded. Yeah, start right here at the top. Attention recruits.
Attention recruits. Here's 1916, Great War rages across Europe. Battlefields are filled with new and terrifying machines of war, changing the way battles are fought forever. The military has assigned you a top-secret mission. Investigate one of these cutting-edge weapons and prepare for occupied leaders for high-ranking officials.
All right, so there you go.
Real World War I weapon. Anything from deadly machine guns to unstoppable tanks and stuff to submarines with orders supporting that. These will gather the intelligence with identifying in a persuasive and engaging format to help shape the future of warfare. The fate of the battlefield depends on your report.
There you go. So with research, again, make sure you guys are using MLA format for wherever you get your information, right? Cite your sources. You just can't say, oh yeah, I just know about it from playing, I don't know, Battlefield 1, which was a great game. I love that game. Anyway, so with that, make sure you research this weapon, right? Compile the data together with MLA. All right, presentation format. So again, you can use Canva, Google Slides. If you want to make an iMovie, that'd be cool too. But the idea here is just to make sure you can present this weapon to generals, soldiers, but your classmates. All right, so on Friday, we'll start these presentations. I'd like to get through all of them. We'll see. All right, so anyway, news report. So create an article or a broadcast, like I mentioned, if you want to use iMovie, that'd be pretty cool, something different. But if you just want to put it on Canva, Google Slides, that's fine. Just make sure you describe the weapon, right? Present what its use is, its benefits to the battlefield, right? Maybe the dangers of it too. Holy cow. Soldier's testimony. So tell a story of a soldier using and encounter the weapon. So you can maybe just kind of make up this idea. Maybe the first experience with poison gas. There's a lot of that, right? A lot of that. You can find a lot of resources on that.
and you can mention about the horrors of it, right? So like I mentioned with Tolkien, right? He was the author of The Lord of the Rings. He describes some of these weapons kind of in an older fashion, right? Like in a Middle Ages fashion, but he makes these symbolic relations to it, which is pretty cool. So that's the part where got to be really creative. Battle simulation. So recreate a scene. So if you want to just kind of draw something out, or if you want to create something just quick online with some sort of animation, that'd be great. That'd be different. All right. Again, visual component. So include the picture. So show us what the weapon looked like, right? Maybe there was other variations of the weapon too that you want to introduce or you want to include. That'd be awesome. All right, so blueprint of the weapon, there you go, 3D model. And then again, reenact in video. You don't have to really do anything crazy, but just describe a scene. So like with the soldier's report, you can just describe the scene of the weapon on the battlefield. So again, if you want to do an iMovie, that'd be awesome. If you want to create some sort of animation, that'd be great. All right, here's your requirements right there. So when it comes to the name and nation that utilized it, that'd be obviously beneficial. So when it comes to the tank, right? I just told you a little bit of the story about the tank, where that came from, what kind of story was surrounding it to disguise it. So the enemy, Germany, didn't know what kind of weapon it was. All right, again, battle impact, strength, weaknesses, creative presentation. There you go. And then here's just a breakdown of the points, the scoring. All right. And here's a list of weapons. So as you scroll down, firearms and small arms, there's a few of them I just found online that you guys can research. Machine guns, there you go. Artillery and explosives, there you have it. Chemical weapons and flamethrowers, there you go. Tanks, armored vehicles. All right. Dreadnoughts. I know we talked about dreadnoughts. That's something, again, you can research too. Is there any questions? Any questions? Again, it should be a fun activity. I'd like to give you a little bit longer than obviously 10 minutes, but I like to give you guys some time at the end of each lesson throughout the week. But you got to work on this, in your spare time. So if you're in a study hall, after school, if you don't have a study hall, you got to put some effort into this, okay? So anyway, there you have it. Real quick, here's your discussion post. So your discussion post is linked right here. So yours is honors, obviously. And you guys already started filling out. Great. Awesome. So once a weapon's chosen, you got to find something different. First come, first serve. All right. So I'll give you guys the rest of the time here. Stay quiet, but you can meet with whoever you're working with. If you're working by yourself, that's fine too. That's fine too. All right. Perfect.